Billionaire came home early and caught his maid doing the unthinkable to his daughter. What he stepped into that afternoon would shatter everything he believed about safety, loyalty, and the walls money builds around a family. He wasn't supposed to be home. His jet had been delayed, his meetings canceled, fate quietly rearranging itself behind the scenes. The house was silent in that unnatural way that makes your skin prickle, too quiet for a place where laughter usually echoed. Then he heard it. A sharp, frightened gasp. A muffled sob. And in that instant, the billionaire's heart dropped into his stomach as he followed the sound toward the living room. Unaware that the next few seconds would ignite a chain of events, no amount of wealth could contain. The doorframe cut the room in half. And what he saw beyond it struck him like a blow. His daughter, small, shaking, eyes wide with confusion, stood frozen near the sofa, while the maid loomed over her, hands clenched, voice low and cruel. It wasn't just discipline. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was fear, raw and unmistakable, etched across the child's face. The billionaire felt a cold rage rise, so fast it stole his breath. Time seemed to slow as every instinct screamed the same word: protect. Only hours earlier, the day had begun like any other. A rushed breakfast. A goodbye kiss on his daughter's forehead. A promise he'd be back late. The maid, quiet, efficient, always polite, had thanked him as usual, eyes lowered, posture respectful. Nothing about her hinted at danger. She had been recommended by an agency with spotless credentials. Background checks, references, contracts thick with legal language. He had trusted the process. He had trusted his walls, his cameras, his staff. He had trusted wrong. As he stood there now, unseen in the hallway's shadow, fragments of memory collided in his mind. His daughter's recent nightmares. The way she'd flinched when voices rose. How she'd suddenly clung to him at night, begging him not to leave for work. He had chalked it up to childhood fears, growing pains, imagination. The realization hit him like ice water. The signs had been there all along. The maid's words cut sharply through the room, low, threatening, meant to be unheard. The billionaire's jaw tightened. His hands curled into fists so hard his knuckles burned. Every part of him wanted to explode into the room, to end it instantly. But a lifetime of control, of calculated decisions, held him still for a heartbeat longer. He needed to see. He needed to understand exactly what was happening. And what he saw only deepened the horror. His daughter's hands trembled as she tried to explain something: spilled juice. A broken ornament, a mistake so small it barely mattered. Her voice cracked, eyes darting toward the door as if searching for him, hoping he would appear like a miracle. The maid stepped closer, her presence oppressive, her patience gone. That was the moment the billionaire moved. The sound of his footsteps was thunder in the silent house. The maid spun around, color draining from her face as she realized she wasn't alone. For a split second, her expression flickered shock, calculation, fear. The billionaire crossed the room in 3 long strides, placing himself between her and his daughter, one arm instinctively shielding the child. His voice, when he spoke, was calm in a way that made it far more dangerous. "What," he said slowly, "is going on here?" The maid stammered. Excuses spilled out: discipline, behavior, respect. Words that sounded hollow the moment they hit the air. The billionaire didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His eyes were locked on her, unblinking, memorizing every detail. He glanced down at his daughter crouching to her level, his tone softening instantly. "Sweetheart," he said, "go to your room. Lock the door. I'll be right there." She hesitated, fear warring with relief, then nodded and ran. The sound of her footsteps fading down the hall felt like oxygen returning to his lungs. When he stood again, the room felt smaller, heavier. The maid took an unconscious step back. "You were hired to keep her safe," he said. "Explain to me why she was afraid." The maid's composure cracked. Her voice rose, her story changing mid-sentence. She blamed stress. She blamed the child. She blamed circumstances. The billionaire listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. Inside, a storm raged. He was replaying every moment, every warning sign, every choice that had led here. Then he did something that truly unsettled her. He smiled. It wasn't warmth. It wasn't kindness. It was the smile of someone who had made a decision, and that decision was final. "Thank you," he said quietly. "That's all I needed to hear." He turned away, pulling out his phone. With a few precise taps, he activated systems no one else in the house even knew existed: cameras, audio logs, time-stamped records. His home was a fortress, and fortresses remember everything. As the maid realized what was happening, her confidence dissolved into panic. "You don't understand," she pleaded. "I didn't mean," he cut her off with a raised hand. "You're done speaking." Security arrived within minutes. The billionaire watched as the maid was escorted out, her protests echoing uselessly against marble walls. He didn't gloat. He didn't shout. His focus had already shifted to the hallway, to the closed door behind which his daughter waited, heart pounding. He went to her immediately. Inside the room, she sat on the bed, knees pulled to her chest. When she saw him, she broke. He held her, feeling her small body shake, whispering promises he would never break again. He apologized not for being late, not for one day, but for every moment he hadn't seen clearly enough. "I'm here," he told her. "And I'm not going anywhere." That night, after she finally slept, the billionaire stood alone in his study, the city lights glittering beyond the windows. His phone buzzed with reports, confirmations, legal steps unfolding at lightning speed. But his thoughts were elsewhere. He realized something profound and terrifying. Wealth had built him empires. But vigilance would protect what mattered most. This was only the beginning, because what the maid had done was just the surface, and the truth beneath it would expose secrets. Negligence and a reckoning no one saw coming. Morning came without relief. The sun rose over manicured hedges and gleaming glass. But inside the billionaire's mansion, the air felt bruised, like something precious had been struck and left tender. He hadn't slept. Not really. Every time his eyes closed, the image returned. His daughter's fear, the maid's clenched hands, the moment he realized how blind trust had nearly cost him everything. Downstairs, the house staff moved quietly, sensing the shift in power and mood. Whispers traveled faster than footsteps. The maid's sudden removal had already sparked rumors, but no one dared ask questions. The billionaire sat at the long dining table, untouched coffee cooling in front of him, as his head of security stood nearby with a tablet full of footage. "We've reviewed the last 6 months," the security chief said carefully. "There are patterns." The billionaire didn't look up. "Show me." The screen filled with timestamps, clips stitched together like a nightmare puzzle. Raised voices when no one else was home. His daughter shrinking back. Moments where cameras had been subtly angled away, just enough to avoid clear views. Not accidents, intentional. Someone had known where the blind spots were. "How long?" the billionaire asked, his voice dangerously flat. "At least 4 months, the chief replied. "Possibly longer." 4 months. The word echoed in his head like a sentence being passed. 4 months of fear his child had carried alone. 4 months of signs he had dismissed because deals were closing, markets were shifting, and the world demanded his attention. His jaw tightened until it ached. "Where did she learn this?" he asked. "This behavior." The chief hesitated. "We're still digging. But there's something else." He swiped again. Another clip appeared, this one showing the maid speaking on the phone late at night in the kitchen. Voice low, posture casual. The audio crackled, but the words were clear enough. Doesn't suspect a thing, the maid said. The man's never home. Easy money. The billionaire's hand slammed onto the table. Who was she talking to? He demanded. We traced the number, the chief said. It belongs to a woman with a history. Previously dismissed from 3 households. Allegations of abuse. All settled quietly. Non-disclosure agreements, payoffs. The billionaire closed his eyes slowly. His wealth used by others to erase consequences. Why wasn't this caught? He asked. The chief swallowed. The agency altered records. Someone accepted bribes to clean her file. Silence fell heavy between them. The billionaire stood, pacing toward the window, fists clenched behind his back. Outside, the world continued as if nothing had happened. Cars passed. Birds landed on marble railings. Life went on indifferent. Inside him, something hardened. Contact my legal team, he said. Full audit of the agency. Every contract. Every employee. I want names. Yes, sir. And the maid? In police custody. Charges are being prepared. Good, but it wasn't enough. Not even close. Upstairs, his daughter sat in bed, wrapped in a blanket though the room was warm. A child psychologist sat across from her, speaking gently, patiently. The billionaire watched through the open door, heart aching as he saw how cautious his daughter had become, how she measured every word, every movement. When the session ended, she looked up at him with tired eyes. Daddy, is she coming back? No, he said immediately, kneeling in front of her. She can never hurt you again. She studied his face, searching for certainty. Promise? He didn't hesitate. I promise. Later that day, the story broke. Not the full truth, but enough. Local billionaire fires maid after incident at home. Commentators speculated. Social media buzzed. Some defended him. Others accused him of overreacting, privilege, misunderstanding. The billionaire watched it unfold with cold detachment. He knew how narratives were shaped and how easily truth could be buried under noise. What they didn't know was that he had already decided to make this public. Fully. Brutally. By evening. His legal team filled the study. Lawyers, advisors, crisis managers, all waiting for instructions. They expected damage control, silence, settlements. They were wrong. I want everything released, the billionaire said. Footage, records, agency negligence, names. One lawyer stiffened. Sir, that could expose. I don't care, he cut in. Let it burn. The room went quiet. This isn't about reputation, he continued. This is about accountability. About protecting children who don't have my resources. If my name has to take hits for that, so be it. Slowly, reluctantly, they nodded. Within hours, the narrative flipped. Headlines exploded across screens. Billionaire exposes abuse network and domestic staff agency. Hidden files, silenced families, and payoffs revealed. Former employees came forward. Parents spoke out. Patterns emerged clear, undeniable. What had happened to his daughter was not an isolated incident. It was part of a system that relied on silence and money to survive. The billionaire gave one interview. Just one. He sat stiffly, hands folded, eyes steady as the reporter asked the question everyone was thinking. Why go public? He didn't flinch. Because my daughter was afraid in her own home. And if it happened to her, it's happening to others who don't have a voice. The clip went viral. That night, as protests formed outside the agency's headquarters and authorities launched investigations, The billionaire tucked his daughter into bed himself. He stayed until her breathing evened out, until the tension left her small shoulders. As he turned off the light, she whispered, "Daddy?" "Yes, you came home early." He paused, throat tight. "Yes, I did." "I'm glad," she said softly. So was he. But deep down, he knew this wasn't over. Because the more he uncovered, the clearer it became. The maid hadn't acted alone, and someone far more powerful had helped protect her. And the billionaire had no intention of letting them stay hidden. The next wave hit harder than anyone expected. Within 48 hours of the billionaire's interview, the quiet scandal transformed into a national reckoning. Federal investigators raided the domestic staffing agency at dawn. Cardboard boxes filled with files were carried out under flashing lights. While former executives avoided cameras, faces pale, careers collapsing in real time. But inside the billionaire's mansion, there was no sense of victory. Only vigilance. He had doubled security. Not for himself, but for his daughter. Private guards rotated in shifts. Digital surveillance was upgraded overnight. Background checks were rerun on every single person with access to the property, no matter how long they had worked there. Trust, once given freely, was now earned inch by inch. Yet the most dangerous threat wasn't outside. It was guilt. The billionaire sat alone in his study late one night, staring at a photograph on his desk. It showed his daughter at 5 years old, laughing as he lifted her onto his shoulders during a charity gala. He remembered that night clearly, how he had promised her he'd always protect her. The memory felt like an accusation. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. "Sir," his head of security said quietly, stepping inside. "We found something. Something you need to see." The billionaire straightened instantly. "What is it?" The man hesitated. "It's not just the agency. There's a private donor network connected to it. Wealthy individuals, families. They've been quietly paying to keep allegations buried for years." The billionaire's eyes hardened. "Names." The tablet was handed over. As he scrolled, his breath slowed. Some names were unfamiliar. Others weren't. Philanthropists, CEOs, politicians' spouses. People he'd sat across from at fundraisers. People who'd shaken his hand. They protected her, the security chief said. And others like her. The billionaire closed his eyes. This wasn't just negligence. It was corruption disguised as civility. "Release it," he said. The chief blinked. "All of it?" "Every name. Every connection." "But sir, these people are the reason this keeps happening," the billionaire finished coldly. "And I won't let my daughter grow up in a world where monsters hide behind wealth." The next morning, the expose dropped. It detonated. Networks scrambled. Emergency meetings were called. Lawyers flooded inboxes. Social media erupted into fury as names once associated with generosity were now linked to silence and abuse. Some denied it. Some disappeared. Some tried to settle quietly. The billionaire refused every single offer. Meanwhile, his daughter began to change, slowly, painfully. But she changed. Therapy sessions turned from whispers to words. Fear gave way to anger and then, gradually, to strength. One afternoon, she surprised him by asking a question he hadn't expected. "Daddy, can I help other kids?" The question caught him off guard. "Help how?" "Like me," she said softly. "So they don't feel alone." Something in his chest cracked open. That night, he made another decision. Within a week, he announced the creation of a foundation fully funded, fully transparent, dedicated to protecting children in domestic environments. A hotline. Legal aid, counseling, emergency relocation. No NDAs, no hush money. Just justice. The backlash was immediate. Anonymous threats arrived by email. Subtle warnings were delivered through intermediaries. One message was chillingly clear. "You're digging where you shouldn't." He read it once, then deleted it. If they thought fear would stop him, they didn't know him at all. But danger has a way of escalating. One evening, as his daughter was escorted home from therapy, a black SUV followed them for several blocks before vanishing. Another night, a man was caught trying to photograph the mansion's security layout. Coincidences stopped being coincidences. The billionaire convened his team again. "They're scared," his lawyer said. "That's why they're pushing back." "Good," the billionaire replied. "That means we're close." Then came the call. A voice distorted by technology. Calm. Confident. "You should have stayed quiet," it said. "Your daughter is safe because of us. Remember that." The line went dead. For the first time since this began, the billionaire felt fear not for himself, but raw and sharp for his child. He stood up so fast the chair fell backward. "Lock everything down," he ordered. No movement without clearance. That night, he sat beside his daughter's bed again, listening to her breathe, watching the rise and fall of her chest. He promised himself silently, fiercely, that no matter how powerful the enemy was, he would not lose. Because this was no longer about reputation. It was about war. And the billionaire was just getting started. What he didn't know yet was that the person pulling the strings was closer than he ever imagined. And the final betrayal would come from inside his own circle. The days that followed the Maid's removal felt like walking through a storm. The billionaire, Ethan Cross, had thought removing her would end the danger, but the truth was far more insidious. It wasn't just her. It was the network she had been a part of, a hidden world where wealth shielded cruelty and silence was more valuable than any law. Every call he made, every investigation he ordered, unearthed another layer of deceit. Background checks altered, references falsified, records quietly scrubbed. He realized with growing horror that what had happened to his daughter wasn't an isolated incident. It was a system, a machine that used children like pawns and relied on adults to look the other way. In his study, Ethan sat surrounded by screens, cameras, and tablets. Security footage from the past year was being analyzed frame by frame. At first, nothing stood out until subtle patterns emerged. A glance here, a hand lingering too long there, moments of quiet tension in corners of the house no one noticed. The maid had been careful, almost professional. She had trained to be invisible, to manipulate trust. And she wasn't alone. Ethan's stomach churned as he realized that other staff members had been complicit, some out of fear, some out of convenience, and some out of greed. What are we missing? Ethan demanded of his head of security, his voice tight, almost metallic with barely contained fury. "We're cross-referencing her contacts," the chief replied. "It's extensive. There are dozens of names, some in the same household industries, some in other cities. Some powerful families. Do they know?" Ethan asked quietly. "They do. They've protected her. For years." Ethan's hand slammed against the desk. "Years? My daughter has lived in fear for years and no one saw it coming?" The chief said nothing. Words wouldn't fix this. They never did. It was late at night when Ethan finally called in the first set of victims' families. Mothers and fathers who had once been silent, scared to speak up because of threats or payoffs. They were tentative at first. They expected excuses, vague sympathies, or empty promises. What they got instead was Ethan Cross, a man whose presence radiated quiet power and whose words left no room for denial. "I am not here to negotiate," he said. "I am here to protect your children. And I will not rest until those responsible are exposed." Some wept, some shouted. Some refused to believe that someone with the resources to change everything actually cared. But slowly, the pieces began to fall into place. Accounts, messages, and hidden correspondence revealed a pattern. Wealthy families quietly paying for silence while children suffered. Teachers, nannies, staff, some bribed, some coerced. All complicit in the shadows. It was then that Ethan realized the depth of the betrayal. It wasn't just that his daughter had been threatened. It wasn't just the agency or the maid. The betrayal was systemic. A network of influence, silence, and power had allowed harm to thrive. And if he didn't act decisively, it would continue. The next step was strategic. Ethan couldn't confront them all at once. He had to be precise, surgical. He began compiling evidence, meticulously documenting every instance, every person, every payment, every record altered or erased. His team of lawyers worked around the clock, encrypting files, preparing subpoenas, and coordinating with authorities. But even as the legal and corporate groundwork was being laid, the danger grew personal. Someone began testing the family directly. Packages appeared at the mansion, anonymous, unsettling. One contained a threatening note: "Stop digging or you'll regret it." Another, a smashed toy, placed deliberately in his daughter's room, symbolic and cruel. Cameras caught shadowy figures lingering near property boundaries. And one night, a black SUV followed them as they left therapy. Each incident was calculated, precise, meant to intimidate, to make Ethan think twice. Instead, it did the opposite. He trained his daughter to recognize safety without instilling fear. She learned to report anomalies, to trust her instincts, to stay vigilant. And though the trauma was real, her resilience became a weapon against the forces that sought to keep her powerless. Every day she grew stronger. Every day the billionaire grew angrier and more determined. One afternoon, a shocking revelation arrived. A staff member who had previously been loyal approached him with trembling hands. "Sir, it's worse than we thought," she said. "The maid was connected to someone higher up in your inner circle." Ethan's heart stopped. "Higher up?" he asked. "Yes," she whispered. "Someone who had access to schedules, security codes, the system. Someone who knew exactly how to cover it up." The realization struck like lightning. Not only had someone betrayed him by allowing harm to reach his daughter, but it was someone he had trusted implicitly, a person whose loyalty he had never questioned. Ethan's mind raced. He retraced every step, every interaction, every handover. Faces flickered through his memory. Staff who had been too quiet, advisors who had been too eager to comply. Someone had manipulated the system from the inside, guiding the maid, ensuring that no one noticed the warning signs. The next morning, he summoned the team again. "This isn't just about punishment anymore," he said. "It's about rooting out every single person involved. Every name. Every connection. No exceptions. If anyone believes money can shield them from the consequences of harming a child, they will learn otherwise." The investigation escalated rapidly. Legal teams filed subpoenas, authorities opened new cases, and media outlets began picking up hints of the scandal. Yet the billionaire remained controlled, precise, methodical. Every move he made was calculated, designed to maximize exposure while minimizing risk to his daughter. And then came the tipping point. A video appeared online. It wasn't meant for him. It was uploaded anonymously by someone connected to the agency. It showed the maid interacting with other families, engaging in behavior eerily similar to what had happened with his daughter. The footage was damning. Comments started pouring in, speculation running rampant. Parents shared stories of their children, corroborating the hidden network's reach. Ethan watched the video alone, fury boiling beneath the surface. But beneath the fury, a grim clarity settled in. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about punishment. It was about dismantling an entire system built on fear, wealth, and impunity. His daughter, who had been watching from the doorway, didn't understand the magnitude. "Daddy, what's happening?" she asked. He knelt, eyes locking onto hers. "We're making sure this can't happen to anyone else, sweetheart. And you helped me start it." She nodded, pride and fear mingling in her expression. But the deeper he dug, the more he realized someone close to him had been orchestrating events from the shadows. Every false report, every misdirected call, every erased logit had all been planned. The betrayal wasn't just professional. It was personal. Someone had used his trust against him. The days turned into weeks. Authorities expanded the investigation. The network began to unravel publicly. Arrests were made. Names of influential individuals who had once thought themselves untouchable were splashed across headlines. The billionaire maintained a tight control over every release, every statement, ensuring that while justice was served, his daughter's privacy was protected. Yet even as the scandal consumed the agency and its protectors, the final revelation loomed. The person orchestrating the deception from within his circle had not yet been exposed. And when that moment arrived, it would shake the billionaire's world to its very foundations, proving that the most dangerous betrayals often come from those you trust the most. Every decision, every call, every sleepless night led to this point, a reckoning that was inevitable, unstoppable, and completely unavoidable. And Ethan knew, with every fiber of his being, that the storm was far from over. The final confrontation, the one that would expose the true mastermind behind the Maid, the network, and the betrayal was coming. And when it did, it would not just destroy careers. It would rewrite lives, shatter illusions, and deliver consequences that would echo for generations. For his daughter. For the other children. For anyone who had suffered in silence, Ethan Cross was ready, because the world that had hidden cruelty behind privilege was about to meet a force that could not be intimidated, bribed, or silenced, and the truth would burn everything down. The day of reckoning arrived quietly, almost deceptively. Ethan Cross woke before dawn, the mansion still and silent around him. Outside, the city moved like any other day, unaware of the storm about to hit the most secret corners of its elite. Inside, he moved with precision, reviewing the evidence, ensuring every detail was airtight. The betrayal he had uncovered someone within his trusted circle was more dangerous than he had imagined. This was not just negligence. This was deliberate, carefully orchestrated manipulation. By mid-morning, he summoned the board, his advisors, and the legal team. Everyone knew the gravity, yet none anticipated the scale of the revelation. Screens flickered to life, showing months of tampered security footage, doctored schedules, and encrypted communications between the Maid and someone very close to the billionaire's inner circle. Faces in the room paled as names appeared: trusted employees, senior staff, even a family friend who had once been like an uncle to his daughter. Ethan's voice was calm but carried the weight of absolute authority. Every violation, every cover-up, every person who thought they could exploit my daughter's safety exposed. He paused, letting the words sink in. And no one, no matter their status, will be protected by wealth or silence. The fallout was instantaneous. Those implicated tried to deny, to deflect, to bribe. Threats came in the form of lawyers, anonymous messages, and even attempts to interfere with evidence. But the billionaire had anticipated every move. He had prepared, meticulously, to make this impossible to hide. Authorities were involved, media was ready, and public support had already swung in favor of exposing the network. Meanwhile, upstairs, his daughter watched quietly as her father prepared for the confrontation. She had grown so much in the past week, stronger, braver, more aware. She understood the danger, yet she also recognized the power of truth. The first confrontation happened in the mansion itself. The person at the center of the betrayal, a trusted advisor who had manipulated schedules and tampered with security logs, stood before him, pale, shaking, knowing that all their defenses had crumbled. Ethan's presence was commanding, quiet, terrifying in its controlled fury. "You betrayed everything," Ethan said simply. "You endangered my daughter. You endangered others. And for what?" The advisor stammered, tried to excuse their actions, citing loyalty to others, fear of exposure, even imagined necessity. Ethan did not flinch. "Lies, manipulation, silence, that ends today." By nightfall, law enforcement had taken control. Arrests were made. Evidence was secured. The people who had hidden behind privilege could no longer escape accountability. Every corrupted file, every falsified record, every hush payment, the truth had been laid bare. In the aftermath, the billionaire focused on rebuilding a sense of safety and normalcy. He spent hours with his daughter, reinforcing her courage, her sense of self, and her trust in him. He implemented rigorous safety protocols for the household, trained staff extensively, and personally oversaw every measure to ensure no child under his care would ever feel fear again. At the same time, the public narrative shifted dramatically. Media coverage highlighted not just the scandal, but also the billionaire's decisive action. Headlines praised his transparency and courage, framing him not as a man defined by wealth, but as a father willing to face anyone and everyone to protect his child.